Chapter 16. Roland DeWitt slowed his motorbike to a stop along an empty curb. Then he carefully locked it and set a disillusionment charm over the bike so casual bypassers would not see it. If he had read and memorized his map correctly, Grimold Place would be around the next corner. He had not expected to receive a call so early in the morning, especially not so soon after yesterday's assignment. Usually, he got a day or two to mull things over before being grilled again. But this morning was different. "Is the muffliato spell in effect?" asked the voice on the other end, without preamble. No names were mentioned, but Roland recognized the voice immediately as that of Wizard Pilkington. Hold on," replied Roland, barely functioning, the sharp hoot of the phone having wakened him from a deep sleep. Wizard Pilkington had always insisted that Roland keep his cell phone turned on and nearby, but never had it sounded off so early. Roland set down the phone, grabbed his wand, and quickly whispered, "Muffliato." He returned the phone to his ear. "We can talk now," he said into the phone. "Did you complete the assignment given you last night with different possible scenarios?" Yes," said Roland, still only half awake. "Good," replied the voice. Then it added bluntly, "You need to practice your surveillance techniques more." "Yes, sir," replied Roland automatically. He wasn't surprised he would have to do more surveillance, given how completely he had blown the last assignment. "Put your best alternative solution to the previous scenario into practice," instructed the voice. "Watch for the same person." That woke Roland totally. The mysterious blonde girl who wasn't a witch. She had successfully eluded him once. Now he had a chance to not let it happen again. "And if I see her?" asked Roland. "Watch, but do not interfere," came the reply. "Then report. This is only an exercise, remember?" "Yes, sir," replied Roland, certain this was more than a simple exercise, no matter what the voice said. "Where should I conduct this surveillance?" he inquired. "Grimold Place," replied the voice. "When?" asked Roland, while wondering where the heck Grimold Place was. "Immediately," came the response, and the connection ended. Roland hastily dressed and then dug out a map of London. Wizard Pilkington had instructed him to memorize the map, but Roland had only memorized a quarter of it so far, and not the part containing Grimold Place. Once he located Grimold Place, Roland noted the location and committed it to memory. Then Roland put together his things, grabbed a sandwich to eat along the way, and scribbled a quick note for his parents so they wouldn't worry. Once he had secured his motorbike, Roland quietly walked to the corner of Grimold Place. Though not completely satisfied with the alternatives he had developed, Roland had given the circumstance of his failure a lot of thought. He had finally come to the conclusion that everything had gone wrong the moment the girl had seen him. She had recognized him somehow. Under those circumstances, Roland had to take care to not be seen while conducting his surveillance. He considered the ways he could accomplish this. He could completely disguise himself by the use of Polyjuice Potion, but that was totally prohibited for nons and only lasted an hour. Roland could also put on a traditional Muggle disguise, but somehow he suspected the girl would see through it and not be fooled. Besides, an unfamiliar lone character loitering on a street corner would awaken neighboring Muggle suspicions. They might call in royal security to investigate. An invisibility cloak would be nice, but Roland didn't have any. Finally, Roland could make use of a disillusionment charm. Disillusionment charms were popular at Hogwarts, at least with the nons. Every non could prepare a disillusionment charm easily and usually carried several charms with them in their bags to class each day. With a disillusionment charm, a non had a chance to dodge abusive Slytherins after class. If a non under a disillusionment charm could manage to reach the next classroom and stay hidden until class, or make it to the non-dorms without detection, then he or she would escape harassment for a while. Of course, the Slytherins were free to hunt out their victims in the non-dorms, But it took so long just to go through the maze of pipes to get to the dorms that few Slytherins bothered. Those who did were always disappointed, unable to find their quarry. The Nons had installed several minor magical advanced warning systems, which alerted them to a Slytherin arrival. This gave the hunted Nons time to recast the disillusionment charm and walk around the dorm randomly while no one else was looking. When a Slytherin arrived and inquired on the whereabouts of a specific Non, the rest of the Nons could always honestly answer, "I don't know." Roland saw a faded and worn street sign bearing the name Grimmauld Place. He stopped and pulled out a small egg-shaped container from his bag. Breaking it over his head, Roland felt the liquid drip through his hair and down his neck, activating the disillusionment charm. Now the girl wouldn't see him while he watched. He turned the corner and immediately scanned the area for the blonde-haired girl. He didn't see her anywhere. Roland next stepped quietly down the sidewalk. By walking slowly and quietly, no one would notice his presence while under the disillusionment charm. Roland was good at walking unobserved. He had had 6 years of experience doing just that to avoid Slytherin tormentors. Roland looked around constantly as he moved, trying to observe everything along the way. Surveillance for Wizard Pilkington was more than just standing and watching. Roland knew Wizard Pilkington would want a report of the whole neighborhood committed to memory. Roland picked his way carefully over the piles of trash as he explored the street. He noted with relief the street ended in a circular loop. That meant there was only one way out. He counted the number of broken windows and determined which structures appeared vacant. Roland even discovered a numerical error that placed house number 11 next to house number 13. Then he walked through one of the many narrow walkways between houses to tour what he could of the back of the houses. Old fences with broken boards blocked off the backyards. Peering over the fences, Roland could see a broken-down swing set, barrels of some sort, a clothesline with a few clothes hanging up to dry, and lots more trash. When he had finished his tour and observation of the street, Roland selected a sturdy cardboard box from the piles of trash and returned with it to the beginning of the street. It would have looked pretty weird to see that box floating along without assistance, but by this time Roland had confirmed the street was empty of people and noted that no one awake was looking through the windows either. He turned the box upside down and set it on the sidewalk, right before the first occupied house. Then Roland pulled a brown paper bag out of his knapsack, bearing the letters YCLF, and placed it prominently on the box. Roland had found the bag sitting on his motorbike when preparing to leave his house. No instructions were included, but Roland knew what to do with the bag. He'd set up the last bag and wondered at the letters. Not that he would ask about the significance of the letters, not now, or ever. The presence of the bag confirmed to Roland that the blonde girl had indeed somehow managed to get the other bag out of the station. He longed to know what was in it, but knew better than to look. Ignorance was a defense during Slytherin interrogations, and by now Roland was convinced this situation was much more than a simple training assignment. The less he knew about the details, the better. With the bag in place, Roland retreated further up the street to the location he had selected for surveillance purposes. It gave him a complete view of the street and anything that might happen within it. Roland leaned up against the wall, blending in completely. Then he settled himself comfortably, preparing for a long day of observation. "Mr. Black," began the hallucination as soon as the door had closed, "my name is Holly Wycliffe." "That's an odd name," thought Sirius to himself. "Wonder where I came up with that." "It should be Dursley, though," the hallucination added, "because Harry Potter's my cousin." "Harry?" thought Sirius with surprise. "I haven't thought of him in years. And I really, really need your help in getting to Hogwarts." "Hogwarts?" echoed Sirius out loud. "Yes, Hogwarts," agreed the hallucination. "And I haven't much time," she added urgently. Sirius stared at the hallucination. It was a beautiful rendition of Lily, an early Lily, before she married James. Sirius had never before imagined Lily wearing a dirty blue sweatshirt, though. It wasn't her style. Nor was the dirt smudged on her face and hands. Lily loved the cleaning spells. It was nice, however, to listen to the hallucination speak. The voice sounded so different from the one he usually used. "You see," explained the hallucination, filling the silence, "there's a horrible curse going on, and I've got to get to Hogwarts to try to break the curse and fix things." "Curse?" questioned Sirius faintly. This was the most interesting conversation he had ever had with himself. It almost seemed real. Sirius had no idea he had such a fertile imagination. "Yes," said the hallucination. "It's something called a time reverse curse, and when it happens, everything changes, everything." Sirius stared at the hallucination. He had never heard of such a curse. How had his imagination come up with it? "Well," insisted the hallucination, "will you help me?" "Why?" Sirius stopped, not sure how to complete the question. "Why have I come up with such a thing? Why am I having such weird conversations with myself? Why would I bother asking myself for help?" "Because you're Cousin Harry's godfather," asserted the hallucination. "I thought for sure you'd want to help him." "Harry's dead," replied Sirius automatically. Some things couldn't be changed. "But he isn't," said the hallucination earnestly. "Not really. That's what I've been trying to tell you. It's the curse." Sirius stared at her blankly. What the heck? "Yesterday," began the hallucination, explaining. "No, it was the day before. No, 3 days ago now," she continued, correcting herself. "My brother Vernon found a cursed plaque in a tree and touched it. That's what started the curse. It rewound time, fixing it so Cousin Harry would lose his fight with a basilisk his second year at Hogwarts." "Basilisk?" thought Sirius, confused. "What basilisk?" All he had ever heard was that Harry went missing that year and was never found. "But he wasn't supposed to lose that fight," the hallucination added. "There's another plaque at Hogwarts, you see, and if I can get to it, I can break the curse and return things to the way they're supposed to be. That's why I need your help getting to Hogwarts, so I can help Cousin Harry." This conversation had gotten way too personal. Sirius shook his head, trying to clear his mind, to erase the hallucination, but the hallucination remained, so Sirius spoke. "A quick jaunt up to Hogwarts may be entertaining, Lily," he began, his gravelly voice grating on his ears, "but it won't fix anything, and it won't bring Harry back to life. Now go back to whatever corner of my mind you came from and leave me to my fire whiskey." He turned his back on the hallucination and staggered towards the kitchen, to the icebox, which he knew would be well stocked with fire whiskey. Abruptly, his forward motion was arrested by a firm grasp on his wrist that wheeled him around, forcing him to again face the hallucination. "What the?" thought Sirius in surprise. Hallucinations weren't in the habit of grabbing, were they? Then he felt a heavy weight suddenly come down hard on his bare foot. Looking down, he saw the hallucination's shoe lifting off his foot. "Hey!" he said in shock, looking up at the hallucination. "You stepped on me!" The hallucination's dirty face looked back, and her green eyes blazed at him. "I'm not Lily Evans," she stormed, "and I'm not some fantasy. I'm real, and I'm here, and I need help." The next thing Sirius knew, two very real-feeling arms wrapped around his body, and the hallucination began crying uncontrollably. "I'm not lying, Mr. Black, honest," the figure sobbed into his chest. "Cousin Harry's alive, or he should be, and right now my brother Vernon is tied up in this horrible chair, starving to death. But if I can get to the trophy room in time, I can help him, help us all." Of their own accord, Sirius's arms hugged the hallucination back, and he found his hands unconsciously stroking her blonde hair in an attempt to soothe her and stop the tears. All along, his mind was working furiously. If she wasn't a hallucination, that made her real, and from the outside world. That just wasn't possible because of where he lived. Sirius coughed and tried to clear his throat again. I believe we got off on the wrong foot," he began softly, while trying to ignore the pain of his foot. Speaking louder hurt his head and throat. "My name is Sirius Black, and you are?" The girl drew away from him while she sniffed. wiped her tear-stained face with a dirty blue sleeve, and gulped. Then she looked up at him. "My name is Holly Wycliffe," she replied. "And you are not a hallucination?" Sirius queried gently, while looking directly into her green eyes, still glistening with tears. "No, sir, I'm not," replied Holly firmly, her direct look at him never wavering. "Would you like to come inside for some tea and maybe something to eat?" he asked her, using his most courteous voice. They were already inside, but good manners always made a difference. "I would like that very much," she replied quietly. "Come with me," said Sirius, starting down the long hall. It was a bit of a hike to get to the kitchen, but it was the only place he knew of where he could find actual food. Sirius wrapped his wet, frayed house robe tighter around his body, wishing it had a belt. He was acutely aware of how he must look to her with his tangled gray hair, bare feet, and filthy pajamas. He hadn't bothered to bathe or clean up in years, and probably looked it. In fact, the only thing he wore that gleamed shiny and clean was the silver collar in the shape of a single serpent that twisted snugly around his neck. He would have removed the collar from his neck in an instant if he could. "I'm afraid I wasn't expecting company this early," he told her by way of an apology for his appearance. "That's okay," said Holly politely. "I should have called first to warn you." "Where did you get this address?" Sirius asked as casually as he could while they walked. His steps were unsteady, and his hand frequently rested against the wall between the age-blackened portraits to keep from falling. Sirius knew nothing about time-reverse curses, but he did know it took a secret keeper to get to his house. There weren't many people who knew the location of this place, but each would delight in playing a cruel joke at his expense. Someone set Holly up with this story and his address. Making the girl look like Lily reduced the number of people capable of playing this particular joke to a small handful. Sirius turned those names over in his mind, trying to shake off the last effects of the fire whiskey while he listened to her talk. "Cousin Harry gave it to me last year," she said simply. "He said I was family and could come and visit any time," she added, explaining further. Sirius worked on keeping his balance while listening. Holly reached out suddenly and grabbed Sirius's hand, steadying him. It was almost as if she knew he had been about to fall. "Thanks," he mumbled. "No problem," replied Holly easily. She continued to provide Sirius support while they walked. "Visit?" Sirius inquired when they reached the open doors at the end of the hall. The girl was plainly serious about the curse stuff, but her story didn't fit the facts. Harry wasn't family, not in the sense that would gain him access to the Black family home. He was not related to the Blacks at all. Someone else gave her the address. That somebody had obviously messed with Holly's mind, too. But Sirius had never before had his own invited guest. It didn't hurt to humor the girl and hear more. "Yes, sir," replied Holly as they started down a narrow flight of stone steps. 3 old-fashioned gas lamps immediately sputtered to life along the walls, illuminating the steps. There were no handrails. Sirius heavily leaned on the girl to keep from falling. "I've been here before, you know," she added, as Sirius paused to kick some empty fire whiskey bottles out of the way. They clinked loudly as they bounced and rolled down the stairs, coming to rest against other bottles on lower stairs. "I can tell you about the house if you'd like." That didn't mean much, as anyone who had been here could describe the house's interior. But Sirius liked to listen to the sound of Holly's voice, so he nodded his head and encouraged her to continue talking. "The dining room is on the first floor," she said, "back the way we came. The kitchen is through that door, of course," she added, pointing down the stairs in the direction they were headed. "And in the hall near the door behind that black curtain is a portrait of a very mean lady who likes to yell obscenities." "That's a fairly accurate description of my mum," thought Sirius in silent agreement. Not that she yelled much when there were visitors. They were all Slytherins, her kind of person. The two entered the kitchen. A single gas lamp suspended high from the ceiling sputtered on, providing the only light. Sirius stared at the surroundings with dismay. Despite the gloomy shadows, he could see the huge cavernous room was filthy. The floor was littered with empty fire whiskey bottles. The long table was filled with unwashed dishes and stacked precariously on top of each other, and dirty pots and pans were piled high on the counters. There was no fire in the huge fireplace either, and the kitchen felt cold and unused. I really wasn't expecting company, mumbled Sirius apologetically, knowing that didn't excuse the condition of the house, but he couldn't bring himself to explain further. Holly nodded wordlessly. To Sirius's relief, she seemed to accept his explanation without question. And upstairs, she added calmly, while continuing her house description, as if filthy kitchens were the norm, there's a room with a black family genealogy on the wall, but your name's been blasted off it. I don't know why, though. Sirius stepped forward alone, using the table for balance when necessary, and made his way to the sink on the far side of the table. Holly carefully followed behind, while stepping over filthy rags and more empty fire whiskey bottles that were scattered all over the floor. Sirius turned on the water. The pipes gave a horrible, deathly rattle and lurch. Then some water, red with rust, trickled out, slowly at first, then faster. It had been a long time since he had turned on the tap. Usually, when Sirius got thirsty, he just grabbed another bottle of fire whiskey. And there's a portrait upstairs in the hall of a really nice gentleman who used to be the headmaster at Hogwarts, said Holly loudly, talking over the sound of the running water. I would have never described Phineas Black that way, replied Sirius. The water from the tap finally started running clear. Sirius turned off the water. Well, amended Holly with a smile, at least he's nice to me. Look, said Sirius uncomfortably as he faced Holly, I know I said tea, but to be honest, I don't know where the tea is, and I haven't any way to make it hot. That's okay, replied Holly gravely. Plain water is just fine. Thanks, said Sirius, relieved. He moved over to one of the cupboards by the sink. By the way, he added as he opened the cupboard looking for something he could use for cups, Phineas's portrait hangs in the dining room over the fireplace. The people who knew the location of his home, the ones he suspected of doing this, knew where Phineas's portrait hung. Strange she would make such a mistake. It does? Said Holly, sounding surprised. Well, they kept it in the upstairs hall. Who? Inquired Sirius. He pulled out 2 ugly black glass goblets with silver snakes twisting at the base and stem. He hated these goblets and had broken them numerous times. But Creature liked the goblets and kept repairing them. Consequently, they were fairly clean and rather dust-free. Cousin Harry, replied Holly, matter-of-factly, while she watched Sirius rub the dust from a goblet, using a cleaner section of his robe. He lives here with his family. He does? Sirius asked curiously as he shoved aside some dishes on the counter. Then he set the goblet down on the counter and started cleaning the next. Of course, replied Holly. He inherited it from his godfather. Suddenly the girl's face turned white. Oh, no, she exclaimed. What? That's you, she declared, extremely distressed. That means you're dead. You've died in my world. I've got to go, Holly said abruptly, heading towards the kitchen door. I can't ask you for help. That's like asking you to kill yourself. Sirius reached out and grabbed Holly's arm, pulling her to a standstill, dropping the goblet in the process. It fell with a loud crash. I loved James and Lily Potter, he told her fiercely, tightening his grip on her arm until the blood drained from his fingers. I would have given my life to save them if I could have. And I would have done no less for little Harry. His eyes found her. Even now. She met his gaze, fearlessly studying him, as if she could see into his very soul. Then the moment passed, and Sirius was suddenly aware of how tightly he'd been gripping her arm. He let go abruptly. Holly's arm dropped limply to her side, and he could feel the blood rush quickly to his fingertips again. Sorry about that, he said self-consciously, wiggling his fingers in his hand to bring back the circulation. Holly nodded briefly, acknowledging his apology. Sorry about the goblet, she said apologetically, looking at the bits of broken black glass scattered over the floor. Don't worry about it, said Sirius dismissively. He found a dirty towel on the counter and used it to brush away the nearby shards before walking back to the cupboard. Creature will fix it. He always does. He pulled out another goblet from the set and hastily wiped it off. "You say Harry inherited the house?" he asked as he returned to the tap and filled the goblet with water. Holly nodded. That would explain how Harry had become a secret keeper and lent credibility to her original curse story, except, "I've never written a will," Sirius stated out loud while he held out the goblet to the girl. He noted a bit of red on her hand while she took the goblet. It looked vaguely familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. "Thank you," said Holly softly. Sirius filled another goblet with water for himself and set it down on the counter. He wasn't thirsty. Holly lifted the goblet to her lips and emptied it quickly. When she had finished, she said, "I expect you wrote a will after you escaped from Azkaban prison." She handed the goblet back to Sirius, a mute request for more water. Sirius gripped Holly's goblet tightly. "I escaped?" he said in surprise. "How?" "I don't know, sir, but you did," answered Holly. "I also know you weren't guilty of whatever it was you were convicted of. They tried to clear your name, but you died first." Her voice trailed off guiltily. "That's okay," replied Sirius, sounding calmer than he felt. He refilled the goblet. "At least Harry knew," he added, as he handed the goblet back to Holly. "Yes, he did," echoed Holly, taking the goblet. She drank the water down swiftly and handed the goblet again to Sirius. He refilled it and returned the goblet to Holly. This time she took a small sip and just held the container. "Tell me about Harry," Sirius asked conversationally as he moved to the icebox. "What's he like?" "Quiet," replied Holly thoughtfully. She followed him to the icebox and stood behind him while he talked, "and very polite." "And his looks?" Tall, thin, glasses," began Holly. "He looks a lot like his dad in that Phoenix photo, except for that scar. You're in it too," she added thoughtfully. "The photo," she explained. "I should have recognized you from it, but you're, different," Holly concluded sorrowfully. "That was a long time ago," replied Sirius, remembering. They had all been so young, so hopeful then. Odd, he hadn't realized the Death Eaters had a copy of that photo. They'd never mentioned it before. There wasn't much in the icebox by the way of food, but there was always something. Sirius and Creature had come to an understanding about that. Creature kept the cabinet shelves and icebox stocked with fire whiskey, and Sirius ate the solid food he found in the icebox. Not a lot of it, but enough to keep him alive. Sirius pushed aside the bottles of fire whiskey and found a plate filled with pasties. "You said he had a family?" Sirius asked, changing the subject. He pulled out a pasty and handed it to Holly, taking a second one for himself, to be polite. "Yes, sir," replied Holly. She set her goblet down on the counter and took the pasty in her right hand. Sirius could see more of that red mark. Where had he seen that before? Holly looked at the pasty uncertainly. Then she spoke. "Ginny's his wife," she said distractedly, still staring at the pasty. The girl suddenly took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and took a huge bite out of the pasty, swallowing it quickly. Then she looked up at Sirius and smiled. "Delicious," she said happily, and took another bite. Sirius took a bite out of his pasty. Meat and potatoes, rather bland and dry. No big deal. The girl must be starved to enjoy it so much. "He has 3 kids, James, Albus, and Lily," Holly added in between bites, finishing the pasty quickly. "James is the eldest. Albus is my age, and Lily starts Hogwarts this fall." Holly suddenly reddened, remembering, and added, "Or she would have if, well, you know." "Yes," murmured Sirius dismissively, "if it weren't for the curse." Someone put a lot of work into this curse story. He wondered why. Sirius pulled another pasty off the plate and handed it to Holly. His eyes returned curiously to that red mark, which showed more prominently on her hand as she took it. Suddenly Sirius remembered where he'd seen it. "You're a muggle," he said in shock. Her glance followed his. "No, sir, I'm not," she replied, turning her hand so she could look at the mark. "But my parents are," she added solemnly. "And so's Vernon, my brother." Holly held her hand out so Sirius could see the mark better. "Ravinda did that," she explained. "It's pretty good, don't you think?" Holly tipped her hand back, looking at the mark again. It got me safely out of Aylesbury, she added. They weren't expecting me to have one, she mused. Ravenda's really smart, continued Holly, while staring at the mark. She's a Ravenclaw, you know, or should be. She should be at Hogwarts training to be an Auror, but she's got one of these marks, too. Only it's black. Now she's on the streets, lucky to just be alive. Holly looked up at Sirius. The tears in her eyes spilled down her cheeks. It isn't fair what they're doing to the Mudbloods. It just isn't. Sirius looked at Holly thoughtfully while taking a second bite of his pasty. This story was too detailed, too elaborate, with too many facets. None of the Death Eaters had this kind of imagination, not even Voldemort. Voldemort! What about Voldemort? He asked suddenly, watching her closely. Holly looked up at him in surprise. I thought we weren't supposed to say that name here, she said. I say it, Sirius firmly said with growing interest. She not only knew who he was, but hadn't flinched when he said Voldemort's name. Not a bit. Oh, said Holly calmly. Well, Cousin Harry defeated Lord Voldemort ages ago. Sirius stared at Holly. It wasn't the news of Voldemort's death that gave him pause. A story of Voldemort's death fit with the basic curse scenario she had been telling him. If Harry were still alive when Voldemort returned, Voldemort would have killed him at the first opportunity. Harry was proof of Voldemort's fallibility. For Harry to live, Voldemort would have had to die. It was the ease at which Holly said Lord Voldemort's name. Sirius had been saying Voldemort's name defiantly for years, but no one else did. None of the other Death Eaters called Voldemort by name, and they flinched or hissed angrily whenever Sirius said it. The Death Eaters had spent hours casting the Cruciatus curse on Sirius in an effort to teach him proper respect for their lord and master. Sirius doubted the same people would have ever taught this girl to say Voldemort's name easily, even for a joke. And the other views she had expressed, they weren't the views of any Death Eater. And if they hadn't sent her, that meant perhaps... How come you know about this curse when no one else does? Sirius asked her sharply, actively seeking holes in her story, the effects of the fire whiskey totally forgotten. Dumbledore, replied Holly promptly. We figure he put spells around my family to protect them while they were raising Cousin Harry. Dumbledore's spells must have protected me from the curse, too. We? Well, that's what Cousin Harry guessed happened, amended Holly. Sirius stared at Holly in disbelief. You knew about this curse and didn't do anything? It was Holly's turn to look down. My first year at Hogwarts, she began softly, Albus found a plaque in the trophy room and touched it, setting off the curse. It only works on Cousin Harry or Potter relatives with green eyes, you see. Holly looked up at Sirius with her green eyes, and he could see more tears streaming freely from her face. That's how I know about the curse in the trophy room. But we didn't know there were 2 plaques, I swear. Holly took a deep breath and then continued. Mr. Black, she pleaded, I know about the curse and how to break it because I've done it before, but I've got to get to Hogwarts to do it. I can't help you, Sirius said bluntly, before he lost the courage to tell her. It wasn't fair to lead her on like this, let her think that he could help her when he couldn't. I'd like to, I really would, he added quickly, but I've no wand, so I can't take you. I could show you the way, he added before she could respond, but every time I leave this place, they find me and bring me back. His hand unconsciously reached up and touched the hated silver snake collar around his neck as he spoke. If you left with me, they'd find you too. Holly didn't say a word. She just stared intently at him with her green eyes. Sirius felt the need to say more. I never escaped from Azkaban prison, he said apologetically. It may look like it, but I'm still a prisoner.